Like to present solutions for climate change that I think people should be aware of that I would love to implement. And I have a plan, but I cannot do it on my own. And just, I just really feel like it's come to a point that I need to communicate this to people because people need to know. Um, so I work in the solar industry, and I believe that renewable energy is obviously a major part of the solution. Um, but if you're not aware, the current science uh, is telling us that we actually need to actively remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Um, and it will not be enough to just be zero emissions. Um, so cleaning up the energy sector, eliminating fossil fuels, and even changing our diets with the changing our agricultural system or eating more sustainable foods is not going to be enough to stop the process of global warming, melting the ice caps and permafrost. Um, so yeah, doing nothing or just pursuing a clean energy grid is not going to stop global warming. And so I was a strong believer in a future with only wind and solar and batteries. And I think that technically that's a possible way to power community or society. Um, and Wind and solar and batteries have improved enough that you can have a reliable grid using only those resources. Um, so it may be difficult and, large complex grids to be 100% wind, solar, battery at the moment, but really technologically, there's nothing that prevents us from that future. Um, every the big question people have with energy storage is with long-term energy storage, and the other major question with you know wind, solar, and batteries is the impact of the supply chain that feeds those that the impact on the environment of the mining, processing, manufacturing, transporting around the world um, for like the rare earth minerals needed for solar and for batteries, especially, but also for the magnets needed and the steel needed for wind turbines as well, um, and the all of the materials that go into this infrastructure um, obviously has an impact on the environment. So um, I think that that is manageable, um, but no doubt it does have an impact. Now, I think that it may be sort of ironic, but I actually think that long-term energy storage um, it has a good solution in the form of liquid fuels and what they're calling e-fuels and also biogas. And so, what is kind of amazing is the technology that's been developed by the fossil fuel industry for carbon capture, while it has not been very effective in the fossil fuel world to really mitigate the impacts of fossil fuels. Um, the idea of taking a e-fuel or a type of hydrocarbon and burning it and capturing the emissions does have a lot of potential as both a form of energy storage and also um, the ability to capture the emissions and sequester it for a long time. So, what is needed for that to be a viable solution is we need a carbon neutral fuel that we capture the emissions to make it carbon negative. And there are many options to do that. People are working on. Um, E-fuels has a lot of development, but there's also anaerobic digesters and gasification to take biological uh, organic material and then either the gasification process or anaerobic digesters will yield a combustible gas that's a blend of methane and carbon monoxide and other um, byproducts of the either the anaerobic bacteria or a byproduct of the gasification process. And so this biogas is it's carbon neutral in the sense that the organic matter had um, taken in the CO2 from the environment into the body of the plant, and and then this biomass is then run through the gasification or anaerobic digester, and so you get the combustible gases, um, and you also get the solid waste. In the digester, it's called a digestate, and in a gasification, it is already in becoming a pyrolyzed in that the solid waste is a type of biochar. And so the carbon that is in the biomass and the cellulose, those molecules would want to decompose and release their CO2 back into the environment, but because of the heat in the gasification, um, the molecular structures changed, and it's formed durable bonds. It's almost like reversing the process of it's kind of moving in the direction of turning carbon back into coal, but it's biochar is more like charcoal, and it's a stable molecule for hundreds. of years, maybe longer. Um, and I believe it's possible through more steps to ensure that it is a permanent form of sequestration. So, so I think what I'm trying to say is that, um, you know, capturing the emissions from this power source is actually a part of a solution that, oh, it's like ultimately we want to be removing CO2 as a part of our regular industry in the same way that now in our industries across multiple sectors and every step of the chain, um, our industry is a source of CO2, but what we could intentionally design is a system where our industry is actively removing CO2 at each step in the supply chain. So let's take a step back here. And the sort of existing um, framework for removing CO2, a large category is the nature-based solutions. And regenerative agriculture is broadly um, land management and agricultural methods that are working in harmony with natural processes that are trying to emulate nature to um, to form like symbiotic relationships within the soil and the different crops to form plant and animal communities that assist one another and require fewer inputs um, so that a farm is more self-reliant. It has a smaller impact on the surrounding environment because the fewer inputs means fewer synthetic chemicals. Um, it also means less cost in inputs. Um, but this idea of regenerative agriculture, um, it its central idea is to encourage a healthy soil, and that a healthy farm is built on healthy soil. And healthy soil has rich organic matter and microbial activities. So all of these microbes in the living soil are carbon-based life. And um, so you may think that through like no-till methods and compost and other practices, the organic matter is the the form that carbon sequestration is taking. But it's actually much more than just the organic matter itself. Um, it's not just plant and root material. It's actually the living organisms, even, the little worms and the little insects that live in the soil. Uh, Once you stop killing all the life in the soil every season, Um, if you could just weigh just the bacteria, the insects, the microbes, all the mass of this life, um, it actually there's actually more potential to sequester CO2 in the form of this living soil than there is in planting trees. People think that planting trees is a great solution for climate change, and it is a great thing to do for climate change and ecosystems, and for many reasons. Trees are, um, you know, a part of our biosphere that we need to protect and steward. But there's more potential to remove CO2 through encouraging living soil. And so this should be a major priority for us to convert and transition our agriculture to be as regenerative as possible in all of its forms. And so okay, that's kind of at the foundation of the supply chain, the soil. And so if you think about the way our agricultural system is now, um, it's mainly the land is used as for corn and soy and wheat, and of course there's many other crops and plants that we raise in agriculture, but um, if we just look at corn as a feedstock for many different industries, um, we use corn almost as just a chemical feedstock uh, to make ethanol. Um, the corn is used as, really as a chemical feedstock. And so, there's been a lot of ideas about building off of that concept to replace hydrocarbons in more ways, to make, you know, bioplastics and other products alongside ethanol. Um, there's been a lot of debate about, how whether ethanol makes sense from a environmental perspective. Um, but it seems pretty clear that the current methods of farming, the way that ethanol is made now, it's almost at best it's a wash that ethanol you know requires a lot of energy to produce and produces a lot of emissions in the process of growing it and in actually uh, making the ethanol. These facilities release a lot of emissions, and so what I'm trying to get to is that our agricultural industry is already really built around um, using biomass as a chemical feedstock, and uh, and I think that we should think along these lines. And as more and more vehicles go to electric, um, there will be less demand for oil and ethanol. And so let's say we eliminate combustion engines, which seems to be likely, um, although I feel like there will be some applications for gasoline or other hydrocarbons, and we'll want to have some capacity in some for some reasons, whether it's aviation fuel or their I I I do believe in freedom enough that while my entire life I have wanted to see the end of the fossil fuel industry, and I've wanted to see EVs my whole life. Um, I think people should have the choice if they want to have a type of car or they want to have a hobby with going down to like I don't know, the Derby or whatever, or NASCAR. I think that people should have the choice if that's what they want. Um, but I think that we need to price the externalities of the pollution, and then we need to compensate um, the externalities of the net benefit to society and the environment. And so by subsidizing, providing some incentive in some way, um, pricing the externalities of the benefits as well as the costs. Um, yeah, so I think it makes sense to look very closely at our ethanol industry, and a lot of it, I think, will be not necessary in the future. And I think that it'll be possible to take what was supplying ethanol of all this corn, and it's possible to convert that into biochar. And even through anaerobic digesters or gasification, that it's not necessarily all cost in putting corn into large electric ovens called pyrolyzers, or well, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Um, because with gasification, um, it's in an anaerobic environment, and it's organic matter is heated up, and it releases these combustible gases, which can then be ignited and be a heat source to sustain the process of releasing these combustible gases from the organic matter. And so it's somewhat of a closed loop, so that you do not need to add energy to heat the biomass in order to maintain that reaction of getting more combustible gases to sustain the heat. And so you can then also run a steam turbine from the uh, yeah, from this process. And so So that's all kind of in the category of what people would call BECS, which is like yeah, it's like biomass to energy with carbon capture and storage. So this is an idea that's been around for some time, and there's a lot of debate about the potential for biomass to energy. I think that the way to think about it is that we actually don't need it for the energy. Um, there might be some benefits to a long-term energy storage option that there's different ways to design systems that can act as a form of long duration energy storage. And so it can be useful as a form of an energy source. Um, Gasification is just awesome in the sense that, once you begin the process, it is able to sustain itself. But the cost of the inputs and the overall the like levelized cost of energy is not competitive. Um, and there's still we need to improve the technology of capturing the emissions. It exists, but we need to improve it. And so I think that this is what I really should get to. I should have been trying to focus on this more earlier, but um, so with gasification, you also get the solid waste byproduct that is like biochar. And with an anaerobic digester, you can take the solid waste that it's called digestate, and that can be used to make biochar. Can also be used to make fertilizer. Um, but uh, what we really what we really need is an industry around biochar. And so biochar has it has a lot of potential in a lot of different sectors. And so uh, you can take biochar and make it it's possible to make battery grade graphite. So currently battery grade graphite is there are sources that are mined and but synthetic graphite has higher performance for for batteries, and so it seems that the industry is leaning toward synthetic graphite. Um, However, the way they make synthetic graphite is the the sludge left over, the coal, coke, um, the sludge left over from burning fossil fuels and the petroleum refining process. Um, that is a very pure source of carbon that can then be um, made into battery grade graphite. The way they do that is using pyrolyzers, big electric ovens, that heat this material up in an oxygen deprived environment. And it cooks off all the contaminants, leaving carbon, and it forces the molecules into a more crystalline structure that that is good for the electrical properties needed for batteries. And so our synthetic graphite supply chain is also reliant on uh, fossil fuels. So what we really need to do is uh, is find a source of graphite that is not reliant on fossil fuels, and so it's possible to take biomass that was grown with the regenerative land management and storing carbon in the soil in the process of producing this biomass, and then through either gasification or an anaerobic digester, um, and then burning the gases and capturing those emissions, in that way, there's even more carbon sequestered through that carbon capture and storage. And then the solid waste uh, can be converted into biochar. Um, so hydrogen can also play a role in this, in that we can blend hydrogen with um, biogas, and you can also feed hydrogen into anaerobic digesters, and you get a higher yield out of your digester. Um, that you get kind of like a more dirty mix of biogas, um, but without hydrogen. But when you add hydrogen, it it sort of helps the like your stoichiometry of giving it more hydrogen lets you yield more methane, and so you have a higher energy density than if you just burned the hydrogen on its own, or you burn the biogas um, on its own. You get higher performance if you feed the hydrogen into your anaerobic digester, and then you get higher yields of better quality biogas. And so the whole system of the future farm and energy grid, what we need is to be removing CO2 at every step, and we want a smart system that is able to balance intermittent loads, or intermittent supply, that while yes, wind and solar and batteries can do everything, it just requires a lot of batteries. And I believe that the resources exist to do that, but the impact of you know sourcing all the materials to make all those batteries is debatable. It might be better for climate change, but it may have a worse impact on local ecosystems. And so there's a great piece out there, um, there's a group of talks, and there's some studies put out by a group called Rethink X, and they have presented a really great vision of the future that makes a lot of sense to me. So, what they try to say is that um, the ratio of wind and solar to batteries um, is kind of a choice that we can make. And so we can go with a much higher proportion of wind and solar with far fewer batteries if we overbuild and produce more wind and solar than the absolute minimum requirements. And in this way, then at those low points, the average low point of production um, is higher than if you're at the minimum to reach your total needs. So when you overbuild your wind and solar, then in that worst case scenario, then on average you will need far fewer batteries. But what that also means is that in the best times of the year and in your best conditions, you will be producing far more energy than you need. And this is very similar to the what we learn about in solar when you're designing an off-grid system. When you have a solar photovoltaic system not connected to the grid, you want to design your system for that worst time of the year around the winter solstice, when there's less sun available, and you need to size your battery bank to have, at least like 3 days of autonomy. That's what they say. So if your solar is all covered in snow and it's just not producing energy, you can power all of your loads for 3 days without any solar. And that's for like, a log cabin in the woods. But if we want to have a 100% wind and solar electric grid, um, at least, that I think that there'll be many other sources of power with, obviously hydroelectric and geothermal and nuclear and I'm suggesting that we maintain uh, biogas and that we basically, I suggest that we convert natural gas over to, we should think in terms of methane and create synthetic methanes and biogas and capture the emissions. And so if we design our electric grid for that worst time of the year and we want to have some autonomy in our energy storage, then if we overbuild, then really in either scenario, though there will be times where we have huge excesses of power. And so it's already true today that um, power operators, sorry, they like utility power plant operators will actually price power at a negative rate so that at nighttime, when demand is so low that um, there's not enough consumption on the grid to to keep the grid stable and keep the power plants running, um, because the demand is so low, it approaches a point where you would need to turn off power plant. So whether it's coal or natural gas or another conventional means of power production, um, they can only be sort of ramped down to um, such a point until um, they won't operate below a certain point. And it's much more expensive and yeah, it's much more expensive to turn the plant off and then have to turn it back on. It's probably worse on their maintenance and everything too. So they have negative electricity prices so that there's an incentive for factories and businesses to stay open and have a night shift, and they'll run all their equipment with super cheap or negative electricity, actually be paid to take the electricity. And this means that the power plants don't need to shut off. And so that's one way that we balance supply and demand now. And so I would see that in the future that there'll be times in the summer and times with lots of wind and solar that we'll be producing more power than we're able to consume. And what we want is we want to have flexible loads that can consume that power. And those flexible loads can potentially they can be paid to take the power. Um, and I think that that would just completely change the cost analysis of a lot of different industries. So there may be some very energy intensive processes that are made competitive because the cost of energy is not just cheap, but it's actually a negative cost of electricity. So maybe there's some recycling that doesn't make sense economically in our current system, but the energy required to separate materials um, could be a negative price. There's several types of flexible loads that are likely to be, first, and there's a lot of attention on hydrogen production, so green hydrogen, um, water desalination, carbon sequestration. There's other forms of direct air capture that it's possible you could essentially dump electricity into equipment to be actively removing CO2. Um, Cryptocurrency mining and and other types of data centers. It's possible to pair energy storage with this as well, so that um, a flexible load wouldn't necessarily be turning on and off very often, but a flexible load, it may just have an arrangement where it will operate almost all of the time, but just whenever there are grid conditions that begin to stress supply, that demand is beginning to outpace supply, we can just uh, we can know that these flexible loads can uh, shut off, and they'll remove some demand, and so it'll balance out the supply and demand. So I believe it's possible for biochar to play a large role in this as well. So the electric ovens, the pyrolyzers, um, there could be a series of grades of biochar that are, there could be more like a soil amendment grade of biochar, and it may require, higher temperatures and further treatment to refine um, a base load quality biochar to a battery grade graphite. Um, but yeah, so to really get to 100% wind, solar batteries, this clean energy grid of the future, what we really need is flexible loads. Um, and that's going to empower us to use far fewer batteries. And so when you think about it, just a battery is really just shifting our time of consumption, and it's essentially just all cost. If you could produce the power and then use that power to produce something of value immediately, then, that seems like a better proposition. And so that's basically what a flexible load is. Instead of storing the power in the form of electricity, you're storing the value in another form of value, whether it's water desalination, you're you're converting the value of the electricity into fresh water, or you're converting the value of the electricity into hydrogen through electrolysis. So I think fundamentally this is kind of the transition that we're going through, that our economy revolves around petrochemicals now. And we have what's known as the petrodollar. And people often refer to our currency as fiat, which it is, but it's got a, special relationship with oil that creates sort of relative floating. Um, well, there is a type of artificial demand for the dollar that is created because all currencies are required to convert to US dollars in order to buy oil. And um, so that has a pretty big impact. That's, essentially the US dollar is the world reserve currency because of this special relationship with oil. Um, and because people trust the dollar, because the United States is behind it, and people support that and want to trust something. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening with crypto and blockchain, Bitcoin, and it seems that it's going to play a larger role in the future. But I think that really, um, like what like what Elon says, to go back to first principles, uh, you know, um, the U.S. dollar has the special relationship with oil because oil is our primary energy source. Of course, we use many other forms of energy, coal and nuclear and all these other forms of energy. Um, but um, but yeah, because oil is this international liquid form of energy that our transportation is depends on. It's probably the most central international commodity, and it's energy. Um, so let's think about like a society, maybe thousands of years ago, um, that worked with, or maybe hundreds of years ago, um, a system of like bartering. Um, Probably want to have your most sort of universal commodity and consumable product, like if you're a community that lives by a river and there's a lot of fish, your main staple food item is fish, then you might be doing a lot of trading using fish. And your food is your main energy source. And so there's this very universal principle of energy being tied to currency. Um, this is true in communities that store value in livestock, and so you know how many cows and how many sheep you have, how many goats you have. Um, this is a store of value in traditional societies, and food really is energy. Um, so so in today's world, uh, everything runs on electricity, except for, internal combustion engines and fossil fuel power plants, but it's pretty clear that everything's moving toward um, electricity, with maybe just a few exceptions. And even then, it's possible to think of value in terms of energy. Um, what I would love to see is some way of, well, I don't know. I think it's cool to think about like the units of measurement, the SI international standard units of measurement they're derived from universal constants. Like gosh, I don't really want to try to explain the Planck length or I have to kind of think about that for a sec. But yeah, the speed of light and the mass of an electron and these types of universal constants um, are the basis of um, the standard units of measurement. And people think of economics as a science of sorts. So I think that if the study of economics is the study of uh, trade and the exchange of value in a society, um, the buying and selling of things and units of value, um, then I think it may be possible to get our unit of value, our currency, more closely related to these more universal principles. Um, and it seems that the currency of the universe is energy. Uh, and a watt is a unit of power, and power is the ability to do work. And so this seems to be a pretty good foundation for a currency. Um, when we do work, we get paid in currency. So, the work we do, it's all, um, it all requires energy. And so, so yeah, I've thought a lot about what I've called a watt-based currency. And I think that I actually don't think it's going to require us to like make a specific policy or to sort of consciously do this. I think that just over time, it's almost inevitable that just in the same way that um, our currency now revolves around petroleum because of the necessity of it in our life and its central position in the economy. It's like it's whether we had the sort of petrodollar system we have or there was something else, the economy would still revolve around oil. Um, but if, as we go further down the path of clean energy and eliminating fossil fuels, um, there will be something else that is not the petrodollar. And And yeah, it's just inevitable that our currency is going to be more closely related to our electricity production. And so I think that the ultimate uh, destination is going to be an electric grid that is very dynamic and and having, a very decentralized supply of renewable energy. There's an idea called a prosumer that you're a consumer of energy. You're also a producer of energy, and so there's this term that's been created called a prosumer. It's very likely that nearly every connection to the grid is going to be both a source of energy and a source of consumption, and uh, and so. What we want is units of value that go, um, pretty seamlessly back and forth to follow the energy. We'll have different types of credits that are, incentivizing behavior that creates a stable electric grid. Um, so I think that this is uh, this is going to be the biggest impact in blockchain applications. And it may not necessarily take the form of, you know, Bitcoin going back and forth. Um, it may just be a kilowatt hour that is going back and forth, but it's on a, um, it's possible that, blockchain networks can play a role. Um, I've been enthusiastic about a group called Energy Web Chain that's developing decentralized applications for utility grids, um, kind of, B to B, like business to business blockchain networks. And like one application that they've been working on is having like it's like an NFT, but it's like a digital identity that could be assigned to a vehicle, and then when the vehicle's charging, um, it's already set up uh, to communicate with an with like a online platform for exchanging value. But yeah, it seems pretty clear that AI is going to have a pretty large role in our future energy management system. So basically, instead of people operating the grid on a day-to-day basis, we'll have much of the energy management decisions being automated with AI. And what we want is units of value that are transferable and understandable between, within a system. So whether you're doing an analysis to charge batteries or to power flexible loads or to be, um, you know, turning on uh, reserve long-term energy storage, all these different strategies of predicting what the grid will need, um, us analyzing weather conditions and analyzing, historical um, patterns in energy consumption and in renewable energy production. The AI is just going to be so much better at real-time energy management, and I would think that um, in the way that a blockchain is a public ledger of the history of transactions of exchange of value, that if we're giving AI the power to manage energy, we're ultimately giving it the power to manage value and currency. There's going to be money involved, and we want transparency so we can see, you know, what decisions are being made. We can sort of analyze how they're being made, and and then we can also have a voice to communicate to this AI and in a way that it understands in units of value that we can have a you know gosh, it's like it's like the AI is just gonna manage our infrastructure and just get away from us. So we don't want that. So we want to have a really transparent system to see how all these decisions are being made and then be able to communicate what we would like to be different if we're not happy with something. And so I think that the blockchain will will be really integral to this future energy management system that'll operate our grids. So yeah, basically, once we get to that point, um, we could even ask AI to give us suggestions on, you know, where is the grid most stressed and where's our infrastructure needing more attention, and can give us recommendations on where to build and what, um, or where to make more uh, grid connections. That if we just made like one little um, connection between disconnected parts of the grid, it could help relieve congestion and smooth out transmission. And there's lots of other. Well, what I was trying to say is we need we need a lot of carbon sequestration, and if we can get our electric grid to be more automated and intelligent, and we could really take a very big bite out of that problem. Um, so there's another part of what I would like to see happen that I think is, maybe hard for some people to wrap their minds around, but let's try this. So I think that the space industry is progressing, and it will continue to progress. I I was very cynical growing up, and it seemed that we were among one of the last generations of people before some, calamitous collapse. But seems pretty clear to me now that we're going to continue, and I don't think we're going to be able to really stop global warming. Even all of what I'm trying to promote, what I want to see happen, um, it's going to give us the ability to have a choice in the future of having options. Um, and, over the course of hundreds of years, we'll be able to steer the Earth into a climate that we have a choice in how it ends up. But if we don't do anything, then we really won't have much of a choice. And maybe there would be some calamitous events, series of events, and we do go back to the Stone Age or whatever. But it seems pretty clear that the potential is there. That like if you thought like, what would someone think of seeing the world today from 100 years ago? They wouldn't even recognize it almost. I mean, I guess they would recognize it. It's not all that different, but technology has just advanced so fast, and we've got exponential growth in a lot of different um, types of technologies. And so yeah, I think, you know, I think that we're gonna get off the Earth. And um I think that the space industry has a lot of potential to benefit Earth, and that is where we should really focus. So a lot of people don't seem to understand that the all the benefits that space industry has already given us in the form of, the capabilities of satellites and, um, just the real practical advantages that it's given us, and not to mention just like that feeling of being able to see a picture of the Earth from space and see this little, magical blue marble. It's just, beautiful. And just just imagine what it'll be like to go on YouTube and just hear daily, musings of people living on the moon. And if you want to go on vacation and go to an O'Neill cylinder, the space habitat that has simulated gravity, but you can choose to go to areas with zero gravity and having um, this fantastical future of um, it just sounds awesome. But I mean, that sounds cool and all, but I mean, there's like nearly limitless resources in space. So all this concern about rare earth minerals and not having enough of different elements to make batteries or this or that, um, once we get real full space capabilities, we'll have no shortage of resources. Um, and yeah, it's difficult to comprehend what that world would even look like. If there's, like some people I've seen talk about bringing this, if we brought an asteroid back that has got like a quintillion dollars worth of gold, it would actually like collapse the gold market. The supply demand would just get like obliterated, and such an enormous supply, it would destroy the value. But that doesn't seem like such a big problem, really. Um, but I think to get to that future, um, something I think would be very cool and maybe useful would be um, to send carbon off the planet in the form of fuel and fertilizer and building materials and advanced materials. Feel like there will be a lot of uses for batteries in space. Um, just to have, a backup, uninterruptible power supply. I'm sure you'll probably want to have, multiple sources of power, multiple forms of energy storage. Um, but just really big batteries seem like a smart thing to have on hand, just in case there's an interruption or for regular maintenance, or there's some, massive problem. Uh, you have a large reserve of, uh, you know, energy storage. So battery grade graphite being sent into space, I think, has potential. And while yes, it's probably everyone wants in situ resource, uh, you want to get your resources from space when you're living there. Um, but I think if we continue to lower the cost of sending mass to orbit, and we also create a type of incentive structure for removing CO2 and you know, and permanence is a factor, then there's nothing more permanent than, I suppose, if it was sent into orbit and then it, like, deorbited and went back into Earth. I suppose that's not permanent. But if we, I feel like you could get carbon very, very, very dense, and we could have manufacturing facilities in space, and at least some of the feedstock for some of this manufacturing could be carbon. There's also methane or methanol used as a rocket fuel. Um, and there's also the graphite for electric arc furnaces. If you want to have metal refineries in space, while yes, I'm sure there's sources of carbon, you know, uh, in minerals and the atmosphere of Mars, and I'm sure there's sources of carbon off-world, but I feel like just the less you have to do, the better. Like if you want to be refining metal in space and collect an asteroid and bring it to the moon, and or you want to be refining it in some other sort of space vehicle, um, you probably don't want to like just have to go to find the carbon to make the graphite to make the everything else, that just want to sort of simplify things. Want to go get a lot of platinum from uh, an asteroid. If we could send the material up to do all the refining, uh, then yeah. So so it might seem like what is the real value in that, in sending carbon into space? Like we need to remove like gigatons and gigatons. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but just imagine all the oil we've ever pumped out of the ground, and that's kind of the that's kind of like the quantity of CO2 we need to be uh, sequestering or removing from the atmosphere, and it's a lot. So, so yeah, I mean, I don't think that sending carbon into space will be more than a fraction of a percentage of the total amount that's needed. But but I do think that if we if we do prioritize that and design a system to incentivize sending carbon into space, it can help create a very advanced industry that is thinking in terms of, elements and molecules and energy and really how to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, truly sustainable, so that if we are trying to design orbital habitats or a moon base or a colony on Mars or an asteroid mining facility, um, by solving all those problems and also intentionally trying to create very useful quality products from carbon, and there are requirements to receive incentives. That means that you cannot source carbon from a fossil fuel, and you have to be removing carbon from the environment to make this material. I think that even if the total amount that we send to orbit is, just a fraction of a percent of what is needed, uh, it could create this industry and experts, and it could could be a large part. It could be a um, catalyzing segment of the economy. Um, yeah, and just super cool. You're off-worlding the carbon. Um, it used to be buried underground. We dug it up and we burnt it, and and then we took it out of the air again, and then we sent it into space. It just seems like if we can really get full space capabilities, we're going to be able to solve really any problem that's thrown at us. So I want to try to continue uh, expressing myself. Gosh, I really don't want to be making edits. I know that I have had a lot of pauses in trying to say this, and I really am not kind of camera shy, and really want to I really want to keep at this. I've had a lot of ideas for a long time, and I've written a lot of things down, and I've shared things I've written with people. Um, but ultimately, there's things I need to do to build daily habits, to build up my character, to build up my wherewithal to make this happen. And and so I'm sure I'm going to repeat myself in the future, trying to articulate this again, and I'll probably try to edit this in some way. But yeah, um, yeah, I might make a video, or I might make a channel called "Solving Climate Change," and yeah. So, and I like to explore more topics like agrivoltaics. I think is really key to the future. Agrivoltaics is growing food uh, within a solar array. Um, and gosh, yeah, there's a lot of different topics I'd like to go into. Um, I I'll say that I think the potential for agrivoltaics is just enormous, and it's probably there's a the potential to to take semi-arid environments and when you build a lot of solar in a very hot, sunny environment, um, the shade from the solar panels could could actually it could really benefit plant life where like in the solar industry now there's a lot of focus on how to mitigate the costs of vegetation management or what's called soiling, where they have to wash the panels from dust and dirt being on the panels. And so there's this, really beautiful symbiotic relationship that's formed with solar and the plant life that, in the it's mostly that it's cooler conditions that prevent evaporation that will encourage uh, more vegetation growth. So So you would think that there would be a loss, that there's a sacrifice in trying to grow plants below solar. But in many cases, with many types of plants, they will actually benefit, and you'll have an increase in growth potential. Um, and then there's also a benefit to the solar in having um, the the effect of transpiration of the plant life, um, wicking moisture out of the ground and evaporating has a cooling effect. And so this cooling effect benefits solar in that the lower temperatures um, increase increase the voltage and performance production of the solar. So you get increased growth of vegetation and you get increased solar production. So, in an already agriculturally productive area, that's, maybe it's very marginal, and the extra complexity of trying to harvest crops makes it a real challenge. The most success and what I love to see is planting perennial pollinators, just returning crop land to prairie, and then grazing sheep below the panels. Sheep have proven themselves to be very gentle animals that are compatible with, pretty much any type of solar racking, and they don't want to mess with the wires. And they seem to just fit right in solar array, no problem. It'd be great to find more animals, to how to integrate cows, and I would love to see a type of agrivoltaics, or it makes more sense with wind turbines to graze bison. I would love to see bison return to the prairies, but and there's a lot of people raising bison now, um, but it's all about trying to create these plants and animal communities that are symbiotic, that they take care of each other as they evolved over thousands of years to do. And so, yeah, we're able to, manage the land, you know, to health while getting, food out of it as well. Um, but check this out. There's this plan in the Sahel, just south of the Sahara in North Africa. I guess it's maybe North Central kind of Africa, and they call it the Great Green Wall. And the idea is to plant trees and other agroforestry crops, and to create different water catchment um, structures, and basically apply permaculture principles to the Sahel to try to slow, stop, or reverse the process of desertification, because the Sahara has been spreading, and the human land management practices and global warming and different factors have led to the Sahara growing. And I think that there's an interesting discussion to be had about the environmental impacts of what I'm suggesting. But you could you could put a lot of solar in that area, and then the shade from the solar could help promote grasslands, and what was arid or semi-arid could be converted into grasslands. There may have been very limited agricultural production on a given area, and through all of this shade structure that's, reducing evaporation, and, it's possible that some amount of irrigation could be included, but you could you could make a very massive change to the landscape through intentional design. And so yeah, I think there's just enormous potential there. Um, and yeah, the other thing I've thought a lot about is green hydrogen, made from electrolyzers splitting water. Green hydrogen can be made into green ammonia, a fertilizer. Um, but then they pull nitrogen from the air in the Haber-Bosch process, and currently make ammonia from natural gas. But the natural gas is just a source of hydrogen, and they strip the hydrogens off the natural gas to make ammonia. But we could feed, green hydrogen into a Haber-Bosch facility, and it would make green ammonia. And then there's another method of making ammonia that is just recently been discovered, and people were searching for a catalyst that could produce ammonia directly uh, from an electrolyzer. So you, instead of running an electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, basically um, would be one electrolyzer that produces hydrogen and bonds it to a nitrogen immediately. And so I saw work from Monash University in Australia that they've found catalysts, and they have been able to do this, but it may be 10 years or so until it's a commercial product. Um, but it seems to be on the way. So yeah, back to what I was trying to say. Um, so you could use ammonia in many existing gas turbines can burn ammonia. Um, you could burn hydrogen on its own, or you know, I guess what I'm trying to think, you can also run a fuel cell, and the byproduct of burning hydrogen, if you have pure hydrogen and it combusts with oxygen, your byproduct is water. And so it just seems like there must be a place for this in a food and energy future, where in energy storage in the form of hydrogen, or so it's true of ammonia too, or even part of the byproduct of burning, methane, or anything during combustion. There's it's water is a byproduct of the combustion. But yeah, let's say you had if you were to have a colony in space, or if you're trying to have a self-sufficient food production facility um, in a very desert environment, maybe a part of the water input to a farm if especially if you had a extremely efficient, low rates of loss, like a semi-closed loop, like an aquaponics, hydroponics system, um, or if you're just trying to irrigate below an agrivoltaic system. Um, just seems like the potential is there. I don't know if that would ever make sense. Might make sense to just run a lot of desalination or just to, honestly, actually, what is also very cool with agrivoltaics is that water will condense on the solar panels and then drip down. So I mean, I suppose it depends on the humidity and temperature and you know a few factors, but um, from what I've heard, there's really a significant amount of condensation, and so you know, I guess I was trying to suggest the potential of agrivoltaics in very arid and semi-arid environments to reverse desertification. And, then the question is, what's the water source? Um, so just something as simple as condensation can have a very big impact. Um, and in permaculture, uh, things take time. And so it may be that you've introduced a shade structure to the environment, and it may not be the first year, the second year, the third year. Um, but um, once organic material takes root and you begin to form a type of ecology in the area with plants that didn't exist before, but you introduced them or they took root on their own, um, they begin to retain more moisture and begin to create a little more of a microclimate and there can just be remarkable shifts in the landscape over a period of years with the introduction of a shade structure and swales and planting perennial plants. Uh, so there's a lot of potential. We do have the solutions to most of the world's problems, and it just takes time. It takes somebody to do it. I guess I've been thinking about these things for a long time. I'm working in the solar industry. I'm sharing ideas with people, but at the same time, I'm not actually making this happen in a more real, tangible way. And so, I mean, if I'm super passionate about this and I've done all this research and I'm not really making it happen, then how can I expect anyone else to make it happen? I can't look out at the world and say like, why isn't this happening if I'm not trying to make it happen? And just telling people about it is is easy. It's hard to, try to really put together a project that is demonstrating all this. Um, that's what I want to do. Um, I have a lot of ideas. There's some specific areas. There's one specific site that I'm uh, very optimistic for the potential of. Um, and so I'm sort of making this video to try to document my thoughts in, a video format to share with people. And then hopefully it can something I can look back on and write down these thoughts in a way that's a little easier to communicate to people. Um, and yeah, I want to just like keep doing this, make it happen. So, well, if you listen to this, then you know, comment, let me know what your thoughts are. I'm definitely interested if if anybody has any thoughts, comments, questions. Have a nice day.